Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With Israel paused to attack Gaza by land, sea and air, we raised several questions connected with this issue. The questions are political, they're strategic, but they are also, let's be honest, moral. Joining me for this discussion is Israel's former Deputy Foreign Minister and former Ambassador to Washington, Danny Ayalon. Mr. Ayalon, I want to start with a few questions that are presently being asked in India and get you to respond to them. There's no doubt that what Hamas has done is horrendous, it's deeply condemnable, it's completely unforgivable. But in response, by cutting off electricity, fuel, and only restoring water to southern Gaza yesterday evening, and not even permitting Egypt to send in supplies, Israel is inflicting collective punishment on all the people of Gaza, the vast majority of whom are innocent civilians. How is this justified?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on and giving me the opportunity to clarify. This is not a collective punishment. We have to understand that what do we face, what are the objectives, and how we can draw lessons from history. Some history are quite recent. So what we're facing is a jihadist movement, a jihadist culture. With them, it's do or die. There's no compromise. They do not want compromise. For them, it's going all the way. And the Hamas is only one particle of the whole global jihadist movement, which includes the Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko el-Haram, if you will, in Africa, in Nigeria. And the masterminds are in Tehran, Iran. We have a real problem here with militant and radical Shiite Muslims who are together with Sunni. You know, the Hezbollah is Shiite, Iran is Shiite, Hamas is Sunni, ISIS is Sunni, but they are here together on the jihad movement. So we are all here on the same boat. You have the I would say the enlightened civilizations, whereby Israel, the United States, Europe, India, we are all together in the same boat. Unfortunately, on the other side, we see Iran, we see North Korea, and behind them we see China and North Korea and Russia. So the line now has been drawn in the sand. Now, what are we doing there? The demand of Israel after this horrendous war crimes, and actually crimes against humanity, is unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender will allow the population of Gaza, which is not involved with Hamas, to be safe. Now, if there is no unconditional surrender, we'll have to bring one. And by the way, you know what was the demand from the Allies against the Japanese in World War II and against the Nazis? Unconditional surrender. Unfortunately, it took a lot of collateral damage. You know, Japan.
Can I pick up on something you've said, Mr. Ayalon? In that answer, you said the vast majority of people in Gaza are not connected with Hamas. Yet the people who are suffering because you've cut off electricity, fuel, and food, and you only restored water in southern Gaza yesterday evening. The people who are suffering because you won't let Egypt send in supplies are those ordinary people who are not connected with Hamas. This is why it's collective punishment. And in fact, your closest Arab ally, President al-Sisi of Egypt, according to this morning's Washington Post, said to Secretary of State Blinken, this is collective punishment. He said Israel has gone well beyond self-defense. So your closest Arab ally believes this is collective punishment.
Well, if anyone inflicts collective punishment is Hamas, which actually has been doing and engaged in a double war crime, because they have been for the last 20 years targeting only civilians on our side, killing many. And not only that, the second war crime is that they hid themselves and embedded themselves in populated areas where they use their own population, civil population, as human shields. No more. Now, what are we doing? First of all, we have allowed humanitarian corridor as of this morning. And maybe this is something that I can bring as news to your viewers. We have opened up now the Rafah, so we allow humanitarian to come in, including water and electricity. By the way, electricity
is the Rafah crossing open? Because 10 minutes ago, the BBC was reporting it was not open, and that Americans with Israelis or Palestinians with American passports were waiting to cross over but not permitted. That was 10 minutes ago on the BBC.
Well, Israel has agreed. Now it's a matter of practical moves on the ground, and it pretty much it depends on the Egyptians. I hope the Egyptians will be effective enough and fast enough to do that. But from Israel's
the Egyptians have insisted, and this was the condition they laid down, I think 2 days ago, that they will only permit Palestinians with second citizenship to cross over to Egypt if Israel allows Egyptian trucks with supplies to come in. Those trucks are there and waiting. Israel seems to be very reluctant to let them in.
No, not really. You see, the Egyptians should look at what Turkey did. Only a few years back, after the butchery of Assad, of his own population in Syria, 4 million Syrian refugees fled Syria into Turkey. What did Erdogan do? First of all, he said, I refuse to take them. Then, with international pressure, he did receive them, and he built them tents for 2 million refugees, Syrians that still live in tents in Turkey, providing shelter, providing blankets, providing food, providing water, and a lot of money from the international community. This is what he is expected to do. This is the only thing.
Is this what you want? Is this what you want Egypt to do? To open the Rafah border and accept up to 2 million people from Gaza? People who will then have become refugees a second time. They first became refugees in 48, which is what they call the Nakba. And as Gideon Levy said, thereafter, they were refugees in their own land. Now, from the refuge they have, you want to push them into Egypt. Is that what you're hoping Egypt will permit?
I will ask you another question. Would you like them to die under the rubbles of Hamas, or would you like to give them life and some future if they are temporarily moved into a shelter and then are moved back? Now, Nakba, who is doing the Nakba? It's their own leaders. You know, by the way, Hamas has a historical line to the Mufti, which was the leader of the Palestinians back in 1948. This Mufti, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, was a Nazi. In 1941, he went to Germany, to Berlin, to meet with Hitler. We have all the documentations. You can see it online, the photo. And he called for the destruction and the demise and the killing of all Jews.
But that surely is not the explanation for the problem you face today. That is a bit of history, but it doesn't justify what people call collective punishment.
Again, well, you have to understand, this is not collective punishment. We are dealing with Nazis. We need an unconditional surrender. If the Hamas will come out and give up its arms, there is no problem. I mean, this is what your viewers should understand. So we're not going. Yeah.
Would you therefore bomb Gaza the way the Allies bombed Dresden to force an unconditional surrender? Remember, Dresden led to enormous deaths, over 40,000 if my memory is correct. Are you prepared for a similar toll in Gaza to ensure you get an unconditional surrender? I mean, do you have the will to go that far?
Yes. Should I remind you what the Americans did in Nagasaki and Hiroshima? Should I remind you that? When you face evil incarnate, which is unwilling to compromise, they are the ones who bringing upon their population the wrath of the heavens now. If they unconditionally surrendered, there wouldn't need to be Hiroshima or Nagasaki or Dresden. It's up to the Hamas. Are you calling on them to unconditional surrender, get out of their bunkers with all their arms? They will not be harmed. They will have to be tried like the Nazis were tried in Nuremberg.
I take your point, Mr. Ayalon. I'll just point out for the audience that the Americans bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki at a time when it was already clear to the world Japan was on its knees and about to collapse. And the debate in America was that was not just an unfortunate bombing, but an unnecessary one. But let's sidestep that issue. Let me come back to a second aspect that worries people in India and give you a chance to respond. It's not just what people call collective punishment. You've also ordered 1.1 million people in Gaza, north of Wadi Gaza, to move south. And initially, you gave them 24 hours to do so, which has now stretched to 36 and even 48. Now, you know this better than me. Not only is it impossible or close to impossible to comply when there is no fuel, most people have to walk. They're even in some cases using donkey carts. But what about the elderly and those in hospital who simply cannot leave? What about children in incubators? And then those who do leave, and several 100,000 have left, where do they stay? The BBC is reporting, their correspondent Rushdie from Khan Yunis, that several are actually staying on the streets of Khan Yunis. Once again, you've effectively made Gazans refugees in their own country.
Well, again, we have to be pointed. Whoever made them refugees are not us, it's Hamas. Now, we will try to alleviate to the maximum of our ability. You know, we are the ones who are caring for lives, including Palestinian lives. This is why we call them to move out of Gaza so they will not be harmed. And also, we are calling on the international community to help them, and we will help them together with the Americans and the Egyptians. This will happen. Now, any case of elderly or anything that needs help, we will do our best to help. And we call on anyone that can help in the humanitarian community worldwide. Now, let me tell you also one last thing I want to say about this. We're not talking about hundreds of miles. Gaza, Israel, we're very small. So we're talking only about a few miles, less than 10 miles, that they would need to leave. So this is not something which is insurmountable, even for elderly.
I take your point that in your view, you are preventing the people of Gaza from greater harm, which would happen if they stayed there. But if you look at it from their point of view, you're pushing them between the devil and the deep blue sea. The devil is Hamas, or the devil is Israeli attacks on northern Gaza. The deep blue sea is they're going to be left on the streets of Khan Yunis with nowhere to stay, with very little food, no electricity. But leave that aside. Let me come to Hamas directly. The Israeli army has announced that it will attack Gaza by land, sea, and air, and it's believed it could happen quite soon. We don't have a precise date and time, but it's believed it could happen quite soon. How confident are you that you can obliterate Hamas? I'm using the language the Israeli army uses, and its infrastructure, much of which is hidden in a labyrinth of tunnels, some of whom are said to be more than 50 meters below ground. How confident are you that even if you do launch this strike, you can obliterate Hamas?
Well, this is exactly my point. You see what Hamas made Gaza. Hamas made Gaza a bunker, a military bunker, a terror bunker. So it's all their responsibility for whatever happens to the population. But unlike Hamas, we do care for the population. And this is why, if I just sum up the other issue, this is why it's not collective punishment. It's out of care for their lives that we want them to move out so we can go into, and we will go into the bunkers. And yes, we have the capability to obliterate Hamas if there is no unconditional surrender. First and foremost, according to the rules of, let's say, law in terms of war, laws, we would like them to unconditionally surrender. If not, we will go and get them, just as Hitler. Hitler, since he did not unconditionally surrender, the Allied forces got into their bunker, to his bunker. We will do the same.
Seymour Hersh, the well-known American journalist, has actually said, I believe, that Israel might use bunker buster bombs, which can apparently create craters that are 50 meters deep, thus accessing all the tunnels. Are you prepared to use bunker busters?
Well, if this will shorten the time of the war, if this will spare lives of civilians, which will clear the area, if the Hamas is not coming out, if the terrorists of Hamas will not come out with giving up their arms, yes, we are willing to do that. This is the only humane thing to do, just to shorten the misery and shorten the war here in Israel and in the region.
I hear your determination, in which case, let me ask you, are you worried that you may succeed in tackling the problem you face today, but because this will lead to enormous and long-lasting grievance and hurt amongst the Palestinian people, you could actually end up creating a bigger problem for the future? As I said, they believe a second Nakba is being enforced on them. They will come back at some point with a much greater sense of grievance, and you could end up with a much worse problem, because at the end, these people will have to come back to Gaza, and you will then have a bigger problem. Does that worry you?
Well, of course it does. But I think that it will take a lot of work, a lot of humanitarian, a lot of political work. We will be the first ones to help them come back to Gaza. We will be the first ones to invest a lot to change Gaza altogether, to rebuild it as a Singapore, if you will. To really make it a huge area for great, they have the most beautiful beaches. It could become a real great ground for tourism industry, for high-tech industry. All this we will do. Now, right now...
Aren't those dreams at the moment that feel very unrealistic in the present circumstances?
Well, again, unfortunately, Israel cannot make the Palestinians hating them more than they already do. Why? Because of the ongoing incitement by the Palestinians that they are teaching their children from first grade on that Israelis and Jews are not human. They teaching them that we are colonizers in our own home, that we are killing them, that we caused the Nakba. Actually, who caused the first Nakba? Their own leaders. The same thing here. When the United Nations General Assembly in 1947 made the resolution that there would be a two-state solution. It's Resolution 181 from 29th of November 1947 for two states in Palestine. What was Palestine? And with all our friends in India, we feel, because we are part of your, I would say, culture, just like as the British, colonized and conquered India, they conquered us, and they called it an old name, which is called Palestine, but it's Judea, Samaria. Palestine is a.
I understand, sir. Let's focus on what the situation is today. I want to raise with you two comments made by our political leaders to see how you respond to them. The first is by President Isaac Herzog. And clearly, he doesn't accept any distinction between civilians in Gaza and Hamas. And I'll just remind the audience that in your answers, you are clearly distinguishing between the two, because you say the action is to protect the civilians from the dictatorship of Hamas. Your president doesn't accept that distinction, because this is what Bloomberg has quoted him to say. It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat. President Herzog seems to be suggesting that it's not just Hamas that your army is out to obliterate, but the entire Palestinian population of Gaza.
President Herzog is right. The facts that he mentioned are accurate to the dot, to the T. However, I do not have any illusions. The population could not have risen against Hamas because they would have killed them. So I would say again, we do, even though they supported, I don't care if they supported Hamas politically or not. Civil populations should not be involved, should not be harmed. And this is why we ask them to leave temporarily, to shelter until they can come back.
I will point out for the audience that although you began by saying what President Herzog has said is correct, what you said thereafter made clear that you differ with him. You said that the people could not have risen up against Hamas because they would have killed them. The president actually said they should have risen up, they could have risen up, and the president's position is they're complicit. You're not saying they're complicit, you're saying they couldn't have risen up, they'd have been killed. And you also said, we must ensure that civilians who are innocent are not killed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the view, and I believe this will be the view of the government. And maybe, I don't know, I didn't hear the President Herzog, but maybe he misspoke. That also happens, but I'm sure that in his mind is just like in mine, is not to hurt civil populations, even though they were supporting Hamas ideologically.
Mr. Ayalon, politicians often misspeak. It's a bit unfortunate when a non-political president does so, but let's leave that aside. Last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, and I'm quoting him, "We'll change the Middle East forever." And then shortly afterwards, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, Gaza will never go back to what it was. Now, was that just angry rhetoric in the heat of the moment, which is understandable even if it's a bit exaggerated? Because if they meant it, and they do try to implement it, won't you end up provoking Hezbollah and Iran to enter the conflict? In fact, this sort of comment that we're going to change the Middle East forever would also have repercussions in Riyadh.
Well, it will be good repercussions. When they mention that they are going to change the Middle East forever, that means for the better. That means no more radical jihadists roaming all over the area, killing innocent people, ISIS type or Nazi type. This is the idea. And when they say we will change Gaza forever, this is exactly what I told you a few minutes ago, to turn Gaza into a Singapore. This is the idea. Now, if Hezbollah acts up, they will end up in the same as Hamas.
But you know, Mr. Ayalon, when Crown Prince Mohammed met Secretary of State Blinken, I'm quoting from today's Washington Post, first of all, he kept him waiting for hours. The meeting was fixed for the evening. It didn't happen till the next morning, and the American Secretary of State was literally cooling his heels, waiting till he would be admitted to the palace to meet the Crown Prince. And then, when he did meet the Crown Prince emphatically said, lift the siege of Gaza. That doesn't suggest the Crown Prince will support the remaking of the Middle East. That suggests to me that if your Prime Minister is going to remake the Middle East, he could turn someone that was looking like a potential friend into a potential foe.
The Middle East will not change overnight. It's a long, long, grueling process. And again, I would like to say that the Hamas is a mortal enemy of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, more so than even the Jewish people in Israel. Iran and the Hezbollah and the Iranian militias, whether it's in Syria or Iraq or whether it's the Houthis in Yemen, they are mortal enemies of the Sunni, moderate Sunni regimes in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Bahrain, in Egypt, and in Jordan. Why do you think the Abraham Accord all started? Because those countries, Bahrain, the Emirates, and others, realized that Israel is not the problem, Israel is the solution. The problem is Iran, and they need to get together with Israel to defend ourselves collectively against the radical extremism of the Ayatollahs in Iran with their proxies, Hezbollah and all. And by the way, it's very interesting to note, the Iranians are not confronting anyone directly. They would fight They would fight, the Iranians would fight until the last Palestinian is dead, until the last Lebanese is dead, until the last Syrian is dead. And this is what all the region here understands. So yes, Mr. Crown Prince has to say what he has to say, but in the long run, he understands that his, I would say, survival is very much dependent upon alliance with Israel and the United States.
So are you also there suggesting, or at least hinting, that the Saudi-Israeli deal which the Americans were brokering and which official sources, although unnamed in Riyadh, have so told multiple papers is on pause, that after a certain lapse of 6 or 8 months, it can be revived because the interests of the Saudi royal family lie in the promises America has made to secure the deal, like an ironclad security deal, like agreement for a civil nuclear program. Is that what you're hinting at, that it can still happen even though it may be paused for a few months?
Well, I cannot speak for the Saudis, but I would say that anyone who understands geopolitics and the history and the fabrics of the Middle East understands the complexities, that you cannot say, certainly not publicly, everything that you think. And you cannot right away, do things that have to be on a gradual basis. But look, today, we have now 50 years almost of peace with Egypt. 40 years peace, we almost 30-something years with Egypt, with Jordan. And at the end of the day, what we see that the Middle East is split into two forces, a force of jihad and led by Iran, and destruction is their motto, and a force of coexistence and peace, and which is led by, hopefully, Saudi Arabia at the end of the day, but the other soon with Israel and the United States.
Let's come to the United States. They are your closest friends and your closest and strongest supporters, and that has been the case for 75 years. However, last week, whilst addressing Jewish leaders in Washington, President Biden said Israel must observe the rules of war. And I noticed that in an interview he gave CBS 60 Minutes yesterday, he repeated that. Separately, Secretary Blinken, this time while standing beside your prime minister, said Israel must avoid killing innocent civilians. And again, he repeated that deliberately. I think it was at Cairo airport before he was leaving Egypt. Are these subtle warnings to Israel not to do something that your friends would find difficult to defend or at least to ignore?
No, this is very consistent with what we're doing and what we're saying. Hence, again, we go back to your initial point about asking the population of Gaza that is not involved with Hamas leave the area. Also, what the president said was that you have to obliterate Hamas. His other point was, but we should not occupy Gaza, which we do not intend to. So once Gaza is cleared up, just like as Berlin was cleared up from the Nazis, just like as Tokyo was cleared up from the imperial, let's say, militant powers, we will do the same. We will not stay there. Who will stay there? That's a question. Can the Palestinian Authority, do they have the wherewithal to take over Gaza? I don't know. I hope they will. But in any case, there may be some structure of an international, let's say, humanitarian force.
Can I interrupt? Forgive me. Are you absolutely sure you can enter Gaza by land, sea, and air, as your army has promised it will do, and not spread the conflict across the region? Hezbollah's deputy chairman has explicitly said that they will enter. And according to Axios, the Iranians have sent you a message to the United Nations that if you do enter Gaza, we will intervene. Those are two enemies that you don't want joining this battle because it'll make it worse. And surely the strain on Riyadh would be enormous if you were to enter. So are you sure that if you enter, you won't end up with a much worse conflict than you have today?
I don't have the crystal ball, but I know what are the objectives and what should be done in order to secure a good future for the entire region. Now, again, you have to understand the Middle East. There is an Arabic saying, I'll say it in Arabic, kalam fadi. That means, you use words. Words are pretty much meaningless. Now, Hezbollah has to say what they have to say in order to show solidarity. Iran has to say what they have to say because they feel ashamed that and guilty of prompting Hamas to bring the worst calamity for the Palestinian in Gaza. However, if indeed they miscalculate and Hezbollah attacks or Iran attacks, they will end up like Hamas.
Are you worried that the situation that Israel faces in the Middle East as a whole has altered very significantly? Just 10 days ago, you were establishing closer relationships through the Abraham Accords with your neighbors, both Muslim and Arab in the Middle East. There was a real hope and possibility you'd establish a meaningful relations with Riyadh, by far the most important Muslim Arab country in the area. Suddenly now, instead of becoming part of the Middle East, you're isolated and your Muslim and Arab neighbors are distanced from you. All that you'd achieved till 10 days ago has unraveled.
No, this is not mutually exclusive. To do away with the radical forces and to keep relations with the moderate forces for the future. And again, you cannot look at it just from a tunnel view at this point. Of course, at this point, we don't expect the Arabs to say anything differently. But when everything is said and done, they will play according to their interest. So we are not very isolated. We still have a formal relation. You don't see that Egypt or Jordan severed diplomatic relations with Israel. Not even Bahrain, or not even Morocco, or not even United. So, by the way, if we mentioned United Emirates, I don't know if you are aware of the new initiative, which is called U2E2. U2 means United Emirates and the United States.
Well aware of it because India is a part of it.
Exactly. The I2 is Israel and India.
But
and
future it has is another matter at the moment. There must be question marks above it. But let me put this to you. What about the hostages? The number seems to vary depending upon which Israeli official you talk to. Some people put it at 126, others have put it at 150. But it's a sizable number from your country's point of view. Where are they at the moment when you're poised to attack Gaza? Already Hamas has made clear that if you take such action, they're ready to kill the hostages one by one. Hamas has also claimed that a few anyway have been killed by Israeli strikes, although your government denies that. Are you worried about the future of your own hostages? They may be the forgotten entity as you strike and enter Gaza.
Oh, absolutely we are. And you see again what barbarians we are up against, if the Hamas is threatening to execute them. The issue of the refugees is an issue of humanitarian, I would say, concern, which is not just Israel's. It's the entire international community. It's the Red Cross, the International Red Cross. It's the UN. There are many hostages in Gaza that are not only Israelis. They're Americans, they're Italians, they're French.
Aren't you, sir, kissing them goodbye? And I'm using that phrase deliberately. If you actually physically, forcefully enter Gaza?
No, because we put the onus and the responsibility on Hamas. No
doubt. Hamas will be blamed by you, but nonetheless, they will be killed. I mean, the blame won't help their near and dear loved ones. Suddenly, you will have people in your own country who will say that the precipitate action of entering has led to the death of our kinsman.
Not really. If they're killed, unfortunately, it's going to be Hamas who's killing them, not us. And the Hamas can use all their psychological warfare, but to an extent. And at this point, it's time of war. It's time where they have put the sword on our neck. And when the sword is on our neck, we will do whatever it takes to save our lives, to save our people. You know, we are a people of 4,000 years old with a history, and we had trials and tribulations with the culmination of the Holocaust. We have always survived, we have always thrived, and we will continue to do what we need to do because our legacy and our civilization will live on. And we call upon all nations to join us in fighting against evil in the world. And I must tell you that I'm very pleased to see that the Indian government is very much in friendly terms with the Israeli government.
Well, you've taken the words out of my mouth, Mr. Ayalon, because that is what I wanted to end this interview with, the position of the Indian government. And let me tell you, it's shifted from what it was at the start. For the first few days, it was expressed by Prime Minister Modi's tweets, expressing solidarity with Israel and stating that India stands firmly behind Israel. He even called the Hamas attack terrorism. But on Friday, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson modified that by adding India advocates the resumption of direct negotiations for a sovereign, independent, and viable state of Palestine. And then he added, there is a universal obligation to observe international humanitarian law. How do you view that shift and change in India's position? It was clearly, unequivocally pro-Israel when the Prime Minister tweeted. It's much more balanced now that the Foreign Ministry spokesperson has spoken.
Well, I do not see any contradiction. And again, I think that the Jewish people as a whole in the entire world, and not just Israel, appreciate very much, first and foremost, the people of India and the government of India. And I think that there is a natural alliance that has not been completed yet, but there is a natural alliance between the people of India and the people of Israel, and we will see this materialize. And we do not see it much differently. What Prime Minister Modi said, he's right. Also, what the foreign minister said, he's also right for the future. Because I believe, sometimes you need an apocalyptic event to come out of it ahead. And I believe at the end of the day, after this apocalyptic event, we will start a political process with any willing and able Palestinian leaders that can bring about peace, coexistence, and real great cooperation.
You're saying something very important, and I suspect you're expressing your own view rather than the position of the Israeli government. Prime Minister Netanyahu does not accept a two-nation solution. That is crystal clear from the policies he's pursued over the last 15, 16 years. You're suggesting, or at least it's hinted in that answer, that a two-nation solution may well be the right way of resolving this crisis. But the problem is that will almost certainly involve dismantling many Israeli settlements in the West Bank and perhaps recognizing and accepting East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital. And someone that Prime Minister Netanyahu is close to, President Putin, said virtually this to TASS yesterday. Would you go so far as to say this is something we have to accept?
Well, the principle is right, and I believe we will accept it. Exactly the details, it has to go into some negotiations. There are so many ways to skin the cats, as they say in Washington. So there are many ways, and there are many, many details to be discussed. I'm not sure that Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria should be dismantled, like I don't think that Arab communities in Israel or other places should be dismantled. I think there should be coexistence where it doesn't matter where you live. It mostly matters how you treat your neighbors. And I think this is what we should work on, a real peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. And again, I say here that I am certainly seeing into the future a possibility of a Palestinian state, absolutely. But a Palestinian state which will not be a failed state like Somalia, or which will not be a terror state like Iran or North Korea, but a state which will be an honorable state among the nations, a member of the UN, accepting Israel's right to be here in our own right, in our own homeland, and cooperating with Israel for a better future for all of us.
But if that vision is to ever happen, you will have to stop effectively undermining the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, and the Palestine Authority. Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies have diminished the PLO, the Mahmoud Abbas Palestine Authority. You'll have to build it up yourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can tell you that Mahmoud Abbas, well, he's 88, may he live long, but I'm not sure he will stay there as an effective leader for much longer. The problem with Assad and the PLO was that they have continued the denial of Israel's right to exist or as a Jewish state. And this is the problem. Once the Palestinians do away with the incitement and teaching their children that we should not be here, that this is not our place.
But the Palestine Authority does accept Israel's right to live. There's no doubt about that.
Not as a Jewish state. And this is what we told them. When they talk about a two-state solution, you know what the two-state solution could mean? Two Palestinian states, two Muslim states. This is why we need them to say two-state solutions for two peoples. One is Jewish and one is Palestinian.
Okay. I'm just pointing out for the audience that you have boldly said you are in favor of a two-state solution, although the details obviously have to be worked out. My last question. Clearly, at the moment, your country has united behind your prime minister. It would be very hard to believe they wouldn't. This is a moment of crisis. He's created an emergency unity government. But many believe his policies are also responsible for the crisis you face today. Do you see the end of his career in sight? And I ask you that because you've served in his government. You also have served as his ambassador in Washington. You know him probably better than anyone else I will ever interview. Do you see the end of his career in sight?
The short answer is yes. There's going to be reckoning. After the war, there's going to be a major reckoning, and we will have to see new leadership coming, and new leadership will come and rise up to the task.
Mr. Ayalon, thank you very much for this interview. I'm deeply grateful that you were prepared to accept an invitation from someone you don't know and do a comprehensive interview answering all my questions.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed your way of thinking, your intimate knowledge of details. This was a very, very fine interview, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.